Hello and welcome to the Autism Family Life podcast, bringing you all things autism, family, and life in 30 minutes or less. I am your host, Corey, and thank you so much for joining me for episode number 18 of the podcast, or 19, episode 19 of the podcast. Wow, I lost track. Yes, I did end up taking a little bit of a summer hiatus. It was not completely planned. It's just that things started getting busy and I just did not have the time to sit down and to batch record my podcast. So I took the conscientious decision to take a break, and I also, this is one of those things that I like to tell people that I work with or that are in my Facebook group, that sometimes we need to stop thinking about the work-life balance piece, and instead we need to focus on prioritizing. So my priority over the summer, or the last couple of the month and a half, where I was not recording podcast episodes or really doing a lot on the podcast, instead focused to my family. And ultimately that is what it is all about for me. It's why I decided to stay at home in the first place. It's why I continue to stay at home. And it is why I am continuing to look for ways to supplement my income and to increase my income, because I want to continue staying at home. My family is always going to be my first priority. And, that also includes taking care of myself so I can continue to keep my family as my priority. So I think that's why I want to focus today's episode on prioritizing. And we're going to look at it in a couple of ways, and we're going to talk about those mindset shifts that you need to start taking to really get your priorities together. But before we dive into this week's episode, I would also like to remind you to please subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcasts. We are also on Stitcher, we are on Spotify, and we are now on iHeartRadio, so you can find us there too. And if you were watching on YouTube, then you can go ahead and subscribe to the channel on YouTube. And so just go ahead and hit subscribe to get the latest updates as on your preferred platform. Okay, so back to that piece from the beginning that I was mentioning in the beginning, and that is talking about prioritizing. And the reason I want to talk to you about prioritizing versus finding work-life balance or a personal life balance is because for me, balance was right up there in terms of being a supermom, in that it increased my stress levels so much because I was trying to put equal attention and priority to so many different things. And by doing that, certain things were falling to the wayside, which included my self-care and included just really taking care of myself in general. And I was no longer making myself a priority. And when we don't make ourselves a priority, then we are going to approach and hit that stage of burnout so much quicker than if we were really practicing and being intentional about balance. Not about balance, about prioritizing. We want to make the move from balance to prioritizing. And bear with me for a second while I try to really, explain that in ways that make sense. Because we might think, balance is ultimately what we're trying to do. We're trying to balance our work with our personal life. We're trying to balance our family with our private life. We're trying to do this and do that. And while there's absolutely nothing wrong with trying to achieve a sense of balance within, I think trying to achieve a sense of balance with everything else that we have going on ultimately leads to this unnecessary level of stress, because then we feel pressure to make the time to fit things in. We might start cutting corners in order to fit all the things in that we feel that we need to fit in. And again, for me, that just was right up there with the supermom mentality of I have to do all the things and I have to be all the things for all the people. when in actuality and in reality, I did not need to do all of the things all of the time. What I needed to do was I needed to make priorities. And as I mentioned at the beginning of the episode, the priorities for me, first and foremost, is always going to be my family. So if that means that a work project has to take a back seat, then it has to take a back seat. Or, if another outside obligation needs to take a back seat, then that outside obligation is going to take a back seat. And when I talk about, making my family a priority, that's in multiple facets as well. It's not just about my kids, but it's also about making myself a priority, because if I'm not I don't want to balance anymore. If I'm not making my self-care a priority, and I'm not making myself a priority, then I can't fully and intentionally take care of the rest of my family. I've said this before numerous times on this podcast and some of the past episodes about mom stress and mom burnout and mom guilt. And it was that you cannot pour from an empty cup. And it is so true, because you can't. If you aren't taking care of yourself, then you will not be able to take care of everybody else. So you need to make yourself a priority. And yes, you will probably still feel a little bit guilty about it. That's normal. It happens to all of us. It still happens to me, even though I've told myself that by making myself the priority, I'm ultimately making my family a priority, because I'm taking care of me in order to best take care of my family. So once we start looking at it like that, I think especially for us moms, it gets us to that point where we're less battling with the guilt, and then we can start focusing on other things, and we can start being more intentional about other things, which is the other piece of, for me, it was about prioritizing, and it was about being more intentional with my time. As you'll see here on my word cloud that I have on my wall, or if you're not watching the video, on the wall in my work area, I have a word cloud that has various words that I picked out at the beginning of the year. And they are ones that resonate me and that drive me in my business and in my life. And the three biggest words on this word cloud are family, right at the top, focus, right in the middle, and then beneath focus is intentional. So it meant to me, when I made this shift from balance to priority, and when I made that shift of my self-care being part of the priority of taking care of my family, it meant that I was focusing on myself. It meant that I was intentionally focusing on myself. And then because of that, I could continue to make intentional decisions, and I could continue to be focused, and I could continue to be present. That was my other thing, was that I needed to be present, and my presence was far more important than how. The fact that I showed up was more important than how I showed up. And for me, I have an inner perfectionist, which again went alongside that supermom syndrome. And I had to kind of I had to fail really hard at being a perfectionist in order to finally let it go. And I had to come to terms with the fact that there's nothing wrong with imperfection. And I've learned, along the time and over the past couple of years to really embrace that inner perfectionist. And one thing that really drove it home for me was this quote that I saw, that perfection is not achieved by adding things. Perfection is achieved by taking things away. And for, that really, because I'm that person who likes to just keep going and going and going, and I will keep finding excuses to keep it going. I'm a procrastinator, which means that I like to procrastinate by planning. There's nothing wrong with planning. You're developing action. You're developing your thoughts. You're focusing somewhere. My downfall, though, was always on taking action on those plans. It was implementing those plans. It was taking the next step after those plans. And instead, it became about taking imperfect action versus taking a perfect action, because those perfect actions were the ones that were paralyzing me because I would not take them. It had to be perfect. And every time it seemed that I tried to tweak something or make an adjustment to something, my view and perception of perfection also shifted. So once I finally ditched that mentality, I was able to focus more on being intentional and being present. And then from there, I could also focus more on the prioritizing, not balance. We want to prioritize. So those were like 3 big mindset shifts that I had to make. It was the prioritizing, and by prioritizing myself and my self-care, I am ultimately prioritizing my family. It is about being present and being intentional with presence. And it is about taking the imperfect action versus being trapped in that analysis paralysis, which I think so many of us fall victim to because we keep looking for things that we can add, or we keep looking for things to fix. We keep overanalyzing the situation and coming up with these hypothetical scenarios that 9 times out of 10, it's just not going to happen. But for me, it's very much a reality. I am a worst case scenario thinker, partially because I do have anxiety, and partially it's just because how my brain works. I go for the worst case scenario, and then I want to be prepared for the worst case scenario, even if the worst case scenario does not happen. And, taking it one step further from that, I keep going on other possibilities. Well, if this happens, then this happens. But it might not happen just like that. It might happen in another way. And so what ends up happening for me is that I just get stuck in this cycle of thinking, and I get stuck in the cycle of analysis. So I don't take action, and I'm not present. And then I'm really not prioritizing anything because I'm just stuck. And then I can't do anything because, again, I'm stuck. And I don't like being stuck. I don't like that helplessness that comes with being stuck. It's not fun, because then you start missing out. And you don't want to miss out. This is life. It's meant to be enjoyed, and it's meant to have these moments. And we can't enjoy those moments when we're too caught up in the what ifs, or the could haves, or the should haves. And partially, I say this from a stand as a mom, but not just as a mom, but also as a business owner, as an entrepreneur, as a mom of special needs kids. Especially for us moms of special needs kids, when we get into that analysis paralysis danger zone, it really can be very I'm trying to find the right words for it, but I don't want to say crippling, because it's just not the word. It might be the best way to describe it, but it's one of those things that as a mom of special needs kids, my analysis paralysis, it's almost devastating. It's debilitating. We'll say that. It's debilitating, because then that's all I can focus on. And then I just take myself into this spiral of, oh my God, and I start freaking out. I can feel myself getting there right now, because there's so much uncertainty, and I hate the uncertainty. I really do. I can't stand the uncertainty. I'm not what you would call so much of a control freak, but I just don't like the uncertainty. I like some predictability in my life, and I like some stability, just as we all do. And that uncertainty of what's going to happen in the future, or what's going to happen tomorrow, or what's going to happen, this day or that day or whenever, sometimes I just had to let it go, and I had to trust in the plans or in the process. I had to trust in the process. And I have a very difficult time sometimes trusting in a process, especially when the outcome isn't going to manifest or isn't going to happen for quite some time. That's my other problem. I'm not in everything, but I can be a very patient person. With some things but I'm also a very persistent and tenacious person. So I have to lean in, instead of leaning into my impatience, which completely contrasts, or maybe not quite, but it contrasts that analysis paralysis side. But instead of leaning into my impatience, I need to lean into my tenacity and into my stubbornness and into, the analysis. But I can't get caught in the analysis or stay stuck in the analysis. I also can't stay stuck in my being stubborn or in my being tenacious, because sometimes I hold on for way too long and then I'm not moving forward. So these are some of, more things that I've had to work on, that I still work on daily, because I am a work in progress. I've shared this probably numerous times on my blog. I've mentioned it a couple times on the podcast. I am a hot mess. Truly a hot mess. But there are times and occasions that I hide it very, very well, because I've learned my coping strategies. I've learned mechanisms. I've learned to do certain things that help me function, at least to the best of my ability, on any given day at any given time. So this episode, while it was supposed to be about prioritizing, ended up being, I don't want to say word vomit, but it ended up being, I think, a conversation that was a long time coming from my end, because it was a little bit more of a peek into my mind, into my thought processes, and just in the way that I am kind of put together in terms of my personality and how I and really just how I approach life. This was a necessary episode, and I think it was a great way to have the podcast coming back. We are going to be back every Thursday. I am hoping to have my episodes released by 6 o'clock in the morning, Eastern Standard Time, every Thursday. They will continue to be 30 minutes or less, and the reason behind the 30 minutes or less for these podcast episodes is because I know how busy you are. I know that you are time crunched, and these podcast episodes can be binge listened to, or you can just listen to them, in the pickup line when you're waiting for your kid to get out of school, listen to them in between appointments, listen to them on your terms, and really whenever you have the time to listen to them. If you listen to multiple episodes in a day, great. If you only get to one episode that day, great. Do what you can with the time you have and in the priorities that you have. So we're going to talk about, in our next episode, time blocking, because the time blocking was another thing that really helped me with prioritizing. And we're going to talk about, using both a time log to start tracking how you're using your time so you can be more intentional with your time, so you can start prioritizing your time. Time management is one of those things that I've been meaning to touch on for quite some time. And I think right now is a great time to do it, because we're still in the hustle and bustle and the chaos and the craziness of going back to school. And then we get thrust into another world of craziness and chaos when we start planning for the holidays. So let's make time management, talking about using a time log and some other things. And I will see you or talk to you next week, depending on how you're consuming this podcast. And I hope you have an amazing day.